Hello! Today I wanted to show you how I created this render of Vecna, the creepy monster guy from the new Stranger Things season. Now, to be clear, I don't really know anything about this guy, except that I just saw him in the trailer and I was like, that's pretty dope. So yeah, I'm recreating him in Blender, and this is how I did it. Let's start out with a bit of a sculpting time-lapse. Okay, so here is the final sculpt. I put a little bit more time into it and a little bit more detail, but what you saw was most of it. We can actually extract a lot of detail out of what we've sculpted and use that in the shader. As you can see here, this is a pretty basic scene for lighting at least. We've got a big blue rim light in the back, this kind of key light thing here, and just a normal fill light. And these are all just planes with emission shaders on them, and they light things pretty nicely. Now for actual materials of this guy, you can see things get a little bit more complicated, but I didn't spend any time in the way of UV unwrapping or anything like that, so it was fairly straightforward. You can see I've got this vertex paint layer where I just kind of put in some more fleshy tones for these, I don't know, like muscle bits, and then the rest of it is kind of bluish, and you can see there's a tiny bit of different color for the lips and a tiny bit for the eyes. But otherwise, this was a really simple process of just slapping these on here, and maybe I should have even done a little bit more work on this, but if you look in the rendered view, what I did was I took an ambient occlusion node, so I got this result, put that through a color ramp, which got this terrifying result, and I just took the vertex colors and multiplied that with the result of that color ramp. So now we have a lot more detail for like the edges and stuff, and that just makes the cavities a little bit darker when you plug them into the principled shader. So that's the color for this shader. I also did a pretty similar thing with another color ramp, just got this terrifying result from the ambient occlusion, and I put that into the subsurface scattering, and the result is these white parts, the parts that are kind of sticking out a little bit more, ended up having light pass through them a little bit better than the darker parts, which is kind of how ambient occlusion works, and this just kind of accented that effect. I also took that color map that I was talking about earlier, and I fed in a noise texture and just multiplied that just to give some more variance and detail, and I put that through another color ramp just to soften things up a little bit, and I put that into the roughness of the principled shader, and that got the kind of shiny skin effect you get up here. And then the final thing that I added was this kind of weird abstract texture that I just got from textures.com, and I threw that into a bump node and then just put that into the normal of the principled shader, and there you go. That's some nice surface detail and bumps, and that really helped take things a lot farther. Now finally, I created this tiny little vertex color for the eyes, just made those parts black, put it through a color ramp to sharpen it up a little bit, and then I mixed the shader I was just talking about with an emission shader, and then the eyes were glowing. So that's kind of everything when it came to the rendering. It was a bit of a process of detailing things in. So just to give the render a little bit more spice, in the compositing tab, I added in a few nodes. And so what I wanted to do was just add in some glare on the eyes and some lens effects, some chromatic aberration. And I also wanted to throw in a little bit of atmospherics, so some smoke in the background. And I just started with the render with a transparent background, and I put in the glare node. And with this glare node, I set the mix value to 1. That way it was just the bright parts, and I could use an add node a little bit later on and add in however much of that I wanted, which is just a pretty nice way of having more control over that. Now here with this alpha over, I put some smoke in the background. And you can see it's a bit of a hack the way I did this. I started with this video clip of smoke, which you can get for free, by the way, in the description. More about that a little bit later. Unfortunately, it wasn't the correct aspect ratio. It wasn't the same as the render. So my hack was I just took the render layers and I used an alpha over node. And once I did that, it actually conformed to the aspect ratio of the project, which is kind of obnoxious that you have to do that. But then I just transformed it and stretched it out a whole bunch. You can see the quality is rapidly diminishing, but then I threw that into the factor input of a mix node just to get it to be the color that I wanted. And then to clean things up a little bit, I put that through a blur node just so that it actually looked like it was in the background. And then with the original render layers, I put that through an alpha over node, and you can see that pastes our render on top of that. And then here's that add node, adding in the glare. Looking pretty nice. And here I did the same hack with the smoke. This is actually different footage here. So that conformed it to the right aspect ratio. I scaled it up a little bit and colored it a little bit more red. blurred it a little bit, and then just added that very slightly to the top of everything so it looks like it's in front of our render. And then the last final trick, I used a lens distortion node and just turned up the dispersion a little bit to get that nice lens effect around the side here, the chromatic aberration, and that was everything. So like I mentioned, you can get the smoke video that I used in this composite and a whole bunch of other videos for free. They really come in handy when you want to add some life to a visual effects shot, and like I said, there's a link in the description where you can get them for free. Okay, if you want some relevant learning, check out this video if you want to understand why you should use vertex colors in certain situations and texture paint in other situations.